Why should it matter, this conversation on climate change? Why is it important to us, all of us?
So I think if we care about people, we should care about climate change. So the farmers of northern Uganda, they depend on what they have on their farm and the income they get from it. And climate just gives them fewer opportunities to earn livelihood from their farm as they are used to. And I think so. If we care about those farmers, then we should also care about climate change.
Jared, when I asked that question and he started to say, if you care about people, you said, Why should we care about climate change?
In this country, when we have drought or those episodes where we have disasters like landslides, the economic growth of the country tends to get hit. And this is because we directly depend on nature for our survival as people, but also the economy. I remember very recently in 2016, we had a severe drought. And instead of the projected growth of the country, which was between 7% to 8%, it was cut down to about 3%. So these are very realities that we resonate with so many people and the economy. And of course, the politicians know now about this very well. And I think that is why they are coming up strongly to come up with policy frameworks, legislative frameworks to be able to address climate change. But also, climate change affects the poor more than the rich. You find that the people who are more vulnerable to climate change are hit much more. You can imagine you have a small parcel of land of about 2 or 3 acres, and of course there's drought which has come. Yeah. It's like you put all your eggs in one basket, and it's all gone. And I can see this when I look back home where I come from in Busoga. You have many people largely landless. Others have a small patch of land which they share amongst themselves. And once this happens, there's almost nothing to take home. And you find people taking 1 meal a day instead of the 3 or 4. You find early teenage pregnancies. These are very real on the ground, and I've seen them and sometimes cover them.
Have you experienced people who, this climate change conversation is far-fetched? We don't even understand why it's constantly being brought up.
Yes, of course, there are people who they call climate change deniers. And for them, they believe climate change has always been there. We've heard about the ice age and stuff like that. Yes, indeed, climate change has been there since time immemorial and through the evolution of the earth and life here. But now, ever since the Industrial Revolution, there are changes that have been happening dramatically, and these are attributed to the changes that have happened after the Industrial Revolution. And this is because a lot of emissions have gone out there, and they have kind of formed a blanket around the earth, and they trap a lot of heat which is escaping from the earth's surface, and that is why we have climate change. But of course, for various reasons, there are people who are out there to protect their businesses. Maybe others it's for political interest. Maybe others it's limited information. But yes, it is true. There are some people who deny that the changes that are happening today is not a result of climate change, which is quite unfortunate.
Ole, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, certainly. I think I will add that I think for most of us, actually, it's not these long-term changes. They are difficult to grasp and to understand, and particularly to act on. So people will act on what's in front of them, right? Me included. If you have a problem today, then that's the problem you will fix. But climate change, it is a problem of today, but it's a problem also of tomorrow and in 5 years and in 10 years. And if we act now, then our life in 10 years becomes so much easier. We basically have to act on something that is there now, but just will get worse and worse. And I think, people will invest in a new, more efficient household appliance if they will save electricity, and it can pay itself back in 2 years. But for climate change, the investments we need, they will pay themselves back in maybe 5 years and 10 years. So it makes it, even though people understand and they can see on the graphs that yes, the climate is changing, then they may not act because they don't see it's not that if you stop driving your very large vehicle today, climate change will stop tomorrow, right? That's not how it works. But we all need to act a little bit today, and then in a very long time, we will not see as dramatic changes as on our current course. A little bit complicated. I don't know if it's acronym free, but
it is acronym free. I'm just thinking, listening to you both, I'm just thinking about survival.
Yeah.
Especially when we speak about climate and we heavily relate it to agriculture, then you're speaking about the smallholder farmer. You're speaking, Gerald, about communities that are struggling financially, poor communities. So it's survival. It's you want me to stop cutting down trees, but this is where I'm getting, charcoal that I'm selling and getting, something. And then what do you want me to do about that?
As Gerald said, the people, the poorest and the most vulnerable groups are also the people with the least capacity to adapt to these things. And it's exactly as you say. It's because a lot of the choices people make are because of survival. So I think we should also not, as we go and spread awareness about this, we have to be a little bit careful that we are not only spreading frustration, right? Because we can't expect people that are maybe, as you said, cutting down trees or living on a crop that is about to be unsustainable. We can't expect them to change just because of an acknowledgement that in 15 years it's not going to work. There, I think our response has to be systemic. We need to think about the systems that are in place to support these people. How can these systems be adapted so that we support a change for the future? So just maybe one example: coffee, which is the greatest agricultural export for Uganda. The most high value coffee is Arabica coffee grown in the mountainous areas. We see temperature increases. Those mountainous areas will no longer be able to grow coffee when temperature increases. Farmers are not experiencing an immediate increase in temperature, but I think we do need to support these areas in changing just something as the tree varieties, which takes many years, but we have a collective responsibility to support them in doing that, so that in 15 years we can still enjoy Arabica coffee from Uganda.
How easy is it, Gerald? Because I think awareness is one key area that you start with to start to change the narrative or to change the practices. How easy is that, Gerald? From your work as a journalist and trying to put out information around climate change and its impact and solutions?
Yeah, of course, the responses are quite many, just like my colleague is putting it, and it depends on the level of impact, the level of shock which people are exposed to. You know very well, of course, that example of Bududa, which I keep on referring to. Bududa, the level of shock has been always big, to the extent that people have had to be displaced. An alternative land has had to be found for them to be able to respond by migrating from that part of the world to another. It depends on the level of shock which people are exposed to, and which demands a certain level of response to be able to cope with climate change. In some cases like Bududa, people have been uprooted off the ground and they have had to be moved to other parts where they can be able to live another life.
But then they still go back.
Yes,
and then another mudslide and then they're back.
Yes, but not everybody goes back. A few of them go back because of the attachment they have with the mountains. And of course, this goes with the level of development. People in Uganda, they are still so tied up with the land because this is where they derive a livelihood. And of course, that also matches with their culture. If like you are dependent on the land, even your culture ties you there. these guys do circumcise, and we have a lot of indigenous people around the mountains, not only Mount Elgon, but also Rwenzori. Shifting these people is a very big deal and not easy. And that is why they keep on going back to the land. When it is circumcision, there are certain rites that are done in the mountains. If you take them very far away from their home, there's no way how they are going to be able to keep on practicing some of those practices like circumcision. And even the migration, the relocation has been done within the same area, Sironko, Bulambuli, so that these guys can be able to access these areas when they have to. But of course, some take advantage and go back to those very areas where they have been displaced by landslides. In some cases, the interventions have been done by farmers over a long period of time. Climate change did not start yesterday, just like most people say that climate has been changing. Yes, it has been changing and people have been adapting for a long period of time. If you look at the ecosystem here in central Uganda, around the shores of Lake Victoria, in Buganda, Busoga mainly, people used to practice an agroforestry form of system where they intercrop trees with bananas and other crops. And this used to be a stable ecosystem that would absorb most of these changes which we are talking about. But because of certain reasons, settlement, all those pressures coming up, demographics, we are turning against the trees and cutting them down to be able to get quick money from charcoal burning and the rest of that. And part of the areas where like changes are happening, just like Ole said, refer to the mountains. You find that coffee, which used to do well in the low-lying areas of Mount Rwenzori, around the Kasese areas, it no longer does well. It is shifting up towards the top of the mountains. And the few farmers that can be able to grow Arabica coffee are those ones who can provide shade by planting agroforestry species. I've visited a number of farmers, and this is quite impressive, where they do that. They intercrop trees with a coffee.
Oh, matoke.
Yes, and even matoke. Yeah, so you get food in there, you get a cash crop. And they also do furrows. They kind of do trenches which trap soil and water, so that when it is raining and water runs from up the mountains, it enters the soil and it is held there for a long period of time. And even when they have harsh weather conditions in the dry weather, they are able to have this coffee thriving. So there are those interventions which are doing great and doesn't really cost so much for these farmers to be able to do the same thing. And in any case, in some communities, it is something which is inherent. It's not something which came up yesterday. They have been doing it for a long period of time. It's just simply they are being reminded to do it better.
Ole said something about, when you were speaking about Arabica coffee and how we might get to a point where they're not able to plant it in those areas. What do we do to not get to that point?
I think this is a big risk which we are faced with and which the farmers are grappling with on the mountains. And you see there are fights which have been taking place between farmers on Mount Rwenzori and even Elgon. And both of these mountains, they have got reserves which have been established on the top because of ecological sensitivity. Some of these support ecosystems that you will not find anywhere else in the world. And because of the changes of climate change, farmers, some of them have been coping by moving up, further up on the mountains. And this has set up a conflict between the institutions which manage the reserves, and this is Uganda Wildlife Authority, and the communities that are coming in. So it's not quite easy that they can easily adapt. Some farmers have been doing that. But other farmers, they are taking up some of these practices where they can intercrop their trees, provide to be able to get shade. They can be able to get more moisture getting down there into the soil. They can be able to get organic matter because some of these trees drop very rich litter, which is able to fertilize their crops, and they are able to grow coffee for some period of time. But going forward, I think a lot of changes need to happen, because we are talking about a cash crop being replaced. Fortunately, not in the near future. It could be about 20 or 30 years. And that means we must shift probably from one crop to another where farmers can be supported to be able to generate income and also to preserve the mountains, because climate change is not going to stop now.
Is that the only answer, Ole, that we?
I think it's great to talk about some solutions. I mean, that's what we should do, and I think maybe I can give a few suggestions to the. Now we talked about coffee, so why don't we just keep with coffee? So really, what Gerald was mentioning, there are two fundamental issues or two fundamental solutions just in front of us, right? One is to replace the coffee trees, and the other one is to provide shade trees into agroforestry. And even though, Gerald, you are saying that these solutions are fairly cheap, we still see that farmers are not necessarily adopting them. I think you are you're very right in your point that these are not new solutions, and they are definitely not Danish solutions, right? They are local Ugandan solutions that already exist. We just need a tiny push and kind of a little bit of support. Then people will take it up. And I'll give two examples how we can do that and how Denmark has also worked together with Ugandan partners on that. So in Western Uganda, there are some very well-functioning coffee cooperatives. And there's one called ACPCU just east of Mbarara.
ACPCU.
Sorry, that abbreviation will be the only abbreviation that survives in this podcast. Ankole Cooperative Production Coffee Union, no. That's definitely not it. But
I'm going to Google it while
you can Google it for me. It's a guy called John. He doesn't have an abbreviation.
Ankole Coffee Producers Cooperative Union. You were right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ankole Coffee Producers Cooperative Union. I think I was not complete right now. We have it. So Ankole Coffee Producers Cooperative Union basically does two things. They take the coffee. They buy the coffee from 13,000 farmers and export it directly to Europe. That's one thing they do. And then they support these farmers. And what do they support these farmers with? Well, they support them to adopt agroforestry systems, and they provide seedlings for shade trees. So basically, then you can ask, what's Denmark's role? Well, with one of our partners called the Agriculture Business Initiative, we supported the Ankole Coffee Producers Cooperative Union, ACPCU, to basically invest in this work with smallholder farmers and to better be able to export this coffee, because then you have an entity, a local entity that can provide some of these solutions together with the farmers. And I think the solutions are easy to think of. What is difficult is how to get it to scale, like how to really get this to everybody. And it's fascinating that something that is so simple, just plant some trees, is so difficult to basically get out to everybody. But I'll mention another method we are supporting. We are working with the financial sector through a partner we have called ABI Finance. Basically, if you look at it organizationally, it's very complicated. I'm not gonna go too much into that, but basically ABI Finance works with banks and microfinance institutions and SACCOs, so that when farmers get loans for their inputs, they don't only get the loan, they also get a tiny bit of advice, and maybe they get a loan that lasts a little bit longer, or that's a little bit better suited to them if they adopt some of these practices. So we talked about shade trees, but there are many other practices that are in fact also very locally used, but they are just not widespread enough. So there's something like mulching, where you just cover the soil so that the water doesn't evaporate so quickly. You mentioned already you can do small trenches so that you keep the water. It's not super complicated, but we need to get it out there. And now I mentioned this cooperative and then working through the financial sector as two ways that are effective, and also that we can get to scale. There's also, of course, the government, who has extension officers in all districts who already now are supporting this, and they should adopt this climate change adaptation perspective and help us to get this to farmers, which they are already doing. We're working with them in northern Uganda. They play quite a key role in this. there you have.
It's interesting that you mentioned extension workers. One of I think the episode before, our third episode, was around an extension worker who then tells us he takes this information around climate change or just general information to farmers, and they don't believe him because he's going to tell them one thing and then the weather is going to be another thing.
Yeah.
And so I guess the extension workers are also facing this challenge on just how to break down this information around climate change, because maybe the people don't believe it.
No, and when weather is changing, how can you can't blame people in of course they will believe the weather, and I actually think what Gerald was saying, we have to listen to people's realities, right? We can't promote solutions that when people adopt them, they're like, oh, this is not working, right? We need to find solutions that are working locally for people. Fortunately, a lot of the solutions are also good agricultural practice. If you plant in lines, if you do mulching, if you use the right type of seeds, those things are good for you regardless. We can call them no regret methods. You can do this and you will not regret, and regardless of the weather. And as an added advantage, it is good for you when the climate is changing. So I think those are really the things we need to look at, things that are that help people adapt to climate change, but which are also good, because we are all short term, right? We solve the problems that are there in front of us, and we need to build systems so that people can solve immediate problems, and then at the same time they build resilience to climate change. I don't know, Gerald.
I think that is right on spot, and you find that in many cases information is not reliable because of challenges within the institutions that are supposed to pick this information. For instance, the weather organization, it is still being capacitated, and they will tell you that they have like 30 to 40% of the stuff which they should have. And even the deployment of the weather machines, which are supposed to pick information and localize the weather reports, they don't have enough. So they will say, it's going to rain in these 2 weeks, and there's no rain. And simply because they have not collected information that can be able to give actual information to a specific place. So farmers in that given area will say, no, this is just simply hot air. So whereas from a regional perspective, they'll be able to get it right. But in terms of specific information to some of these farmers, they'll not be able to get it. And I think that is a very big challenge. And in this country, I don't think we are moving the right way, because at some point we used to have a meteorological department, and at some point it was not doing well, it was poorly funded, and of course hidden in the ministry, and they created an authority. But now there's the talk of rationalization of government, downsizing government, and this is one of the institutions they are going to take back under the table. So instead of being capacitated to 30-40%, which is the situation currently, they are likely even to go to sink down there once they are stripped of being an authority to just simply a department. But of course, as we continue with the era of climate change, we need more accurate information. We need people who are up to the game in terms of extension workers, in terms of media personnel, to be able to give good information, high quality information to people. And I think this is where the weather institutions like Uganda National Meteorological Authority should come in.
You've spoken like a true journalist, trying to push the agenda of information sharing and not having it left out. Maybe in closing, from both of you, and I'll start with you, Ole. If we continue business as usual, what does the future look like for us? I'm not just speaking to agriculture, but climate change as a whole. What does the future look like?
Well, if we do nothing, it will simply be very expensive. I mean, this is like a life insurance. Of course, you will take out a life insurance, right? I mean, but if we act now, it's not. There's simple things we can do. And I think we have talked a lot about smallholder farmers. It's definitely true for smallholder farmers. We should focus even more on those groups that are the most vulnerable. But it's actually also true if you zoom out a little bit in larger perspectives. So something like infrastructure, for example, Uganda fortunately is growing very fast and is building a lot of infrastructure, which is great. And actually, it's not a lot more expensive to build a bridge that is ready for the rainfall we shall see in 10 or 20 years than to build it adapted to the rainfall that is there now. It's not much more expensive, but it does require you to, as Gerald was saying, look at the data. You need the data, you need the projections, and then you need to plan for it and to really use that data. And I think, for Denmark, it's the same. It's actually not. It's not automatic that we take in, that we go and find that information, and then we actually adjust our plans so they fit what we know that the future will bring.
So what you're asking us is to think climate change in every sector. Because
Exactly.
I know there's a lot of focus on climate change and agriculture, and if you're talking about roads and bridges that will survive 20 years from now, that's a lot of having people sit down and intentionally think, what's 20 years going to be like for us? And I'm not sure how much of that we're doing.
No, I think I couldn't have said it more precise. It's exactly not a sector, the people working with the people not working with climate change, they have to start paying attention to it, and the people already working with climate change, they need to translate what they know to everybody else, because it is something that comes before the sector, if you will. Are you doing infrastructure? You need to think of it before you start building. I met one of the big chicken companies raising broilers and day-old chicks, and they told me we have to change the way that we build our chicken houses, because we can see that we get more hot days. So we need, all of a sudden, we need ventilation, and imagine if you're making that type of investment without thinking about how will the temperature look in 10 years, then you have to rebuild in 5 years. So if we go on as usual, it's much more expensive. If we do something now, yeah.
That's a really good example of these chicken houses. I think the way we like our chicken, nothing brings it home like that. Gerald, we continue business as usual. What does the future look like for us?
Very risky future. And I don't think we should have that as a choice. We have to do something, and we need to do big things. I've seen many people who are doing adaptation measures or even a mitigation. They are not jumping off the ground the way we should be jumping. When you go to international meetings like the Conference of Parties, you see people sharing testimonies. Some are worse off than the Bududas of this world, which I've been talking about in this platform. You see climate change happening in a real way. But also here, we've had it, Bududa, Kasese. Business as usual cannot be our choice. At a global level again, we see climate action as one of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 13. And it's talking about a range of actions, trying to wake up the world that we are facing a crisis. We need to do something. We have all those goals. We've tried to domesticate or localize that with the climate change policy, the climate change law. These should not just simply be mere papers. They should be translated into real actions for individuals, actions for the community, where you work, as government. We need to do something. Many times when it rains, like today, this afternoon, as an individual, I was thinking about where do I pass?
Flooding.
Yes, to get home. There are spots which I know definitely are going to flood. Clock Tower, then the other side, Banda, Chireka, that area. I stay in Weyogere. So I'll not pass anywhere near there. I'll take an alternative route. That is one example. But just like Ole has been saying, we need to integrate climate change in many of our development perspectives. You find a road, it has been constructed like that for the past 30, 20 years. And even today, as we speak, they are constructing an underpass around between Chireka and Weyogere. And it's almost the same. It's the one which it is replacing. There's no change. We need to take hydrology very seriously. We need to take care of the bad waste management practices which we have. When it rains, in most communities, that is when people are waiting to throw rubbish so that water can take it away. Take it where? It ends up blocking some of these areas, the culverts, getting trapped in some of the wetlands, and water cannot go. What happens? There's a backflow and people are losing a livelihood, they are losing a life, so many things. We need to change, we need to be each brother's keeper, we need to be there for each other. That money which should be for development, we must not steal it. We need to develop proper accountability systems, we need to be responsible. Many things, we've had them, the Chitezis of this world. People don't want to take care of waste. Out of sight, out of my backyard, there's no problem. But there's a bigger problem we are creating at Chitezi. And not only that, when I decide to work in my community, all the time I'm jumping, banana peelings, pampas, and stuff like that. That has far-reaching implications, not only to the hydrology of how the water is going to flow, but also our health. Some people opt to burn waste. We are inhaling all this waste. We cannot afford to live the same way. We need to wake up. Some people will keep on saying, government etuyambe, that is a sign of powerlessness. We have a lot of power in our hands. What if we came together as a community and decided to plant trees? What if we came together and decided that we must sort waste at home in this community and probably add more value, and it creates employment for a few people within our community, would solve the problem and also create unemployment. There are many, many opportunities around most of these things, and we can't afford to sit back.
Gerald, I'm thinking very heavily about that award you won for your climate change reporting, and I'm seeing why you won that award.
Oh, wow, please.
I'm just listening to you speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for making the time. And so there are challenges, as we've had listening to both of you, Ole and Gerald speaking. So we see a risky and an expensive future if we continue business as usual. But also listening to both of you, there are solutions, and the solutions are within. It's really, I think, more about us being more intentional. You spoke about the laws and the policies that are there, but you also spoke about information being a challenge, and we will get into that, I'm hoping, in subsequent episodes of this podcast. So thank you for listening in today. In the episodes that will follow, I'll be delving a little deeper into the science, the stories, and the solutions associated with climate change, but not just as the host of the podcast, as a traveler, finding my way around what we have often called a complex discussion. This is not just a podcast, it's a shared journey. My name is Josephine Karunji. See you next time. And if you want to reach us, climatetalkpod@gmail.com is where to write to us.